The poker chips clattered across the felt table, and Emmett Price watched his last chance at keeping his ranch disappear into the pile before Jacob Morgan, the man who had just won everything he owned in 5 brutal hands of cards. It was the spring of 1882 in Yerington, Nevada, a dusty town tucked into the high desert where fortunes changed as quickly as the wind direction. Emmett sat frozen in his chair at the Silver Spur Saloon, his calloused hands gripping the edge of the table as the reality of what he had just done washed over him like a flood. 26 years old, and he had gambled away the ranch his father had built from nothing, the land that had been in the Price family since they had settled here after the war. Jacob Morgan leaned back in his chair, a satisfied expression on his weathered face. He was a businessman from Carson City, 50 years old with silver streaking through his dark hair and a reputation for being ruthless when collecting debts. His fingers drummed on the table as he studied Emmett with cold gray eyes. "Well, boy, looks like you owe me considerably more than you can pay," Jacob said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "That ranch of yours, what is it worth? $3,000, maybe 4 on a good day." Emmett's jaw tightened. "5,000, and you know it. Prime grazing land, good water access, solid buildings." 5,000, Jacob repeated, nodding slowly. "And you have how much of that in your pocket right now?" The silence stretched between them as the other men at the table quietly gathered their winnings and moved away, sensing the conversation had turned dangerous. The saloon continued its raucous noise around them, but at their table, everything had gone still. "Nothing," Emmett finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have got nothing." Jacob pulled a cigar from his vest pocket and lit it with deliberate slowness, letting the smoke curl up toward the tin ceiling. "I could take your ranch. Sign the deed over right now, and we will call it even." Emmett felt his stomach twist. That ranch was all he had ever known. His father had died 2 years ago, leaving him alone to work the land and the small herd of cattle that grazed there. Without it, he was nothing, nobody, just another drifter in a territory full of desperate men. "There has to be another way," Emmett said, hating the pleading note that crept into his voice. "Give me time to earn the money. I can work, take jobs, pay you back with interest." Jacob studied him through the smoke, his expression calculating. "Time is money, boy, and I did not get where I am by extending charity to every fool who cannot hold his cards. But," he paused, taking another long pull on his cigar, "I might have another proposition for you." Emmett waited, barely breathing. "I have a daughter," Jacob continued. "Theodora. She is 22 years old, educated back east at a finishing school in Boston. Beautiful girl, smart as a whip, but she has got a stubborn streak wider than the Carson River. She refuses every suitor I bring around, says she will not marry some soft city gentleman who does not know one end of a horse from the other." "I do not understand what this has to do with my debt," Emmett said slowly. Jacob leaned forward, his eyes glinting in the lamplight. "You marry her. Proper ceremony, legal and binding. You take her as your wife, treat her with respect, give her a home, and I will consider your debt paid in full. You keep your ranch. I get my daughter settled with a man who knows how to work for a living, and everyone walks away satisfied." Emmett stared at him, certain he had misheard. "You want me to marry your daughter to settle a gambling debt? That is exactly what I am proposing. She arrives on the stage from Carson City tomorrow afternoon. I was planning to stay in Yerington for a few weeks anyway, conduct some business. You have until the candle on this table burns down to give me your answer." Jacob pulled a thick white candle from his satchel and placed it in the center of the table, lighting it with a match. The flame flickered to life, casting dancing shadows across both their faces. When this candle burns down to nothing, I will take your answer as no, and I will expect the deed to your ranch in my hands by sunrise. But if you agree before then, we will shake on it, and I will send word to Theodora to prepare for a wedding." Emmett looked at the candle, at the steady flame consuming the wax. It was thick, substantial, maybe 3 or 4 hours worth of burning time. 4 hours to decide whether to marry a complete stranger or lose everything his family had built. "I have never even met her," Emmett protested. "What if we cannot stand each other? What if she refuses?" "She will not have a choice, just as you do not have much choice right now," Jacob said bluntly. "I am her father, and it is high time she settled down. As for whether you two get along well, that will be up to you to figure out. I am offering you a way to keep your land and your pride. Most men in your position would take it in a heartbeat." Emmett stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. "I need to think. Think all you want, but do it before that candle burns down." "I will be right here, playing a few more hands. You know where to find me when you have made up your mind." Jacob turned away dismissively, signaling to the bartender for another drink. Emmett walked out into the cool spring night, his mind reeling. The stars were brilliant overhead, scattered across the black sky like diamonds on velvet. Yarrington was quiet at this hour, most of the town settling down after the day's work. He could hear music drifting from the saloon, laughter and the clink of glasses, the sounds of people whose lives were not falling apart around them. He walked without thinking, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust on the main street. His ranch was 3 miles north of town, a modest spread with a 2-room cabin, a barn, and enough grazing land for about 50 head of cattle. It was not much by some standards, but it was his, and it was everything his father had worked for, everything he had promised to protect and grow. Emmett found himself at the small cemetery on the edge of town, standing before his father's grave. The wooden cross was weathered but still standing, carved with simple letters. Edward Price, 1825–1880, beloved father. "I messed up, Pa," Emmett said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "I messed up real bad. Thought I could win enough to buy more cattle, expand the herd. Instead, I lost it all." The wind whispered through the sagebrush, but his father's grave offered no answers. "There is this man, Morgan. He says I can keep the ranch if I marry his daughter." "Marry a woman I have never met, never even seen. What kind of man does that make me? What kind of marriage can that be?" Emmett sat down on the ground beside the grave, his back against a rock. He thought about his parents' marriage, about the way his mother had looked at his father even after 20 years together, like he hung the moon every night. They had loved each other deeply, truly. His mother had died when he was 12, taken by fever, and his father had never remarried, never even looked at another woman. That was what marriage should be. Love, partnership, respect earned over years, not a business transaction to settle a debt. But what choice did he have? Without the ranch, he had nothing. He could try to find work on another spread, but jobs were scarce, and most ranchers already had all the hands they needed. He could drift, try his luck in the mining camps or the railroad crews, but that was a hard life with no future in it. At least this way he kept his land, and maybe, just maybe, he and this Theodora could find some kind of understanding. People had started with less and built decent lives together. Arranged marriages were not uncommon, especially among wealthy families back east. Maybe it could work. Emmett pushed to his feet, dusting off his pants. He looked at his father's grave one more time. "I am going to do it, Pa. I am going to marry her. I will keep the ranch, and I will make something of it, make you proud. I swear it." He walked back toward town, his decision made. The saloon was still busy when he pushed through the doors. the air thick with smoke and the smell of whiskey and sweat. Jacob Morgan was at a different table now, playing poker with 3 other men. The candle still burned on the original table, now about a third smaller than when Emmett had left. Emmett walked over to Jacob and waited for him to finish the hand. When Jacob looked up, Emmett met his gaze steadily. "I will do it. I will marry your daughter." Jacob's expression did not change, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, satisfaction, perhaps, or relief. He excused himself from the game and stood, extending his hand to Emmett. "Then we have an agreement. Your debt is settled, provided you go through with the wedding and treat her right." They shook hands, and Emmett felt the weight of the commitment settle over him like a physical thing. He was going to marry a stranger. He was going to bind his life to a woman he had never met, all because he had been foolish enough to risk everything on a hand of cards. "The stage comes in at 3 o'clock tomorrow," Jacob said. "I will introduce you then. The wedding will be in 3 days. Give us time to arrange things properly. Reverend Matthews can perform the ceremony." 3 days, Emmett repeated numbly. "Unless you want to back out now." Jacob raised an eyebrow. No, I will be there." Emmett turned and walked out, needing air, needing space to process what he had just agreed to. That night, he barely slept. He lay in his narrow bed in the ranch house, staring at the ceiling and wondering what Theodora Morgan looked like, what kind of person she was. Jacob had said she was educated, stubborn, beautiful. What did that mean? Would she hate him for this arrangement? Would she make his life miserable, or could they find some way to coexist peacefully? The next afternoon, Emmett rode into town early, his best shirt washed and pressed, his dark hair still damp from washing. He was a tall man, lean and strong from years of ranch work, with brown eyes and a face weathered by sun and wind. He knew he was not much to look at, but he was honest and hardworking, and that had to count for something. The stage was late, as it often was, but finally, Emmett heard the rumble of wheels and the driver's shout. The coach pulled up in front of the general store in a cloud of dust, and the driver hopped down to open the door. 2 passengers emerged. The first was an older woman in a severe black dress, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. The second was a younger woman, and Emmett felt his breath catch in his throat. Theodora Morgan was beautiful. There was no denying it. She was tall for a woman, with auburn hair that caught the sunlight like fire, pulled back in an elegant arrangement. Her face was lovely, with high cheekbones, a straight nose and full lips currently pressed into a firm line. She wore a traveling dress of dark green that showed off her slim figure, and her eyes, as they swept over the dusty street, were a striking shade of blue-green. But it was not her beauty that caught Emmett's attention as much as her expression. She looked furious. Jacob Morgan stepped forward from where he had been waiting. "Theodora, my dear, welcome to Yarrington." "Father." Her voice was cool, controlled. "Your telegram was quite specific. I trust you have not brought me all this way for nothing." "Not at all. Come, let me introduce you to someone." Jacob gestured to Emmett, who stepped forward, suddenly acutely aware of the dust on his boots and the calluses on his hands. "This is Emmett Price. He owns a ranch just north of town." "Emmett, this is my daughter, Theodora." Emmett removed his hat, holding it in front of him. "Miss Morgan, it is a pleasure to meet you." Theodora's eyes assessed him with the cool precision of someone appraising livestock. "Mr. Price, my father mentioned you in his telegram. He said I would be marrying you in 3 days. Her directness caught him off guard. "Yes, madam, that is the arrangement. An arrangement neither of us had any real say in, I imagine." Her tone was sharp, but underneath it, Emmett heard something else. Resignation, perhaps, or anger. "Theodora, perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more private," Jacob suggested, glancing around at the townspeople who were watching with open curiosity. Why? Everyone will know soon enough. Theodora turned back to Emmett. Tell me, Mr. Price, why are you agreeing to this? What does my father have on you? Emmett felt heat creep up his neck, but he forced himself to meet her gaze. I owe him a debt. This is how I am paying it. A gambling debt, I assume. You do not strike me as a businessman. It was not quite an insult, but it was not a compliment either. Yes, madam. I made a mistake, and this is how I am making it right. She studied him for a long moment, and Emmett had the uncomfortable feeling that she could see right through him, see every mistake he had ever made, every shortcoming he tried to hide. Finally, she nodded once curtly. At least you are honest. That is more than I can say for most men. She turned to her father. I assume you have arranged lodging. I would like to rest before dinner. I have a room for you at the boarding house. The proprietor, Mrs. Henderson, is expecting you. Jacob seemed relieved at how well this was going, though Emmett could not imagine what he had been expecting. Tears. A scene. Theodora picked up her small bag, leaving the larger trunk for the driver to handle. Then I will see you both at dinner. Mr. Price, I expect we will need to talk before this wedding takes place. Yes, madam. Whenever you like. She nodded and walked away, her back straight, her head held high. The older woman who had been traveling with her followed, shooting Emmett a suspicious look as she passed. Jacob clapped Emmett on the shoulder. That went well, I think. She hates me, Emmett said flatly. She does not know you well enough to hate you. Theodora is angry, but she is practical. Give her time to adjust to the idea, and I think you will find she can be quite agreeable. Jacob smiled. Besides, you have 3 days to win her over before the wedding. Use them wisely. Emmett watched Theodora disappear into the boarding house, and he wondered if 3 days or 3 years would be enough to bridge the gap between them. She was clearly educated, refined, from a world completely different from his. What could he possibly offer her beyond a small ranch and a simple life? That evening, dinner was at the hotel restaurant, the nicest establishment in Yarrington. Emmett arrived exactly on time, wearing the same clean shirt and his only decent pair of pants. Jacob was already there with Theodora, who had changed into a dress of deep blue that made her eyes even more striking. They sat at a table by the window, and Emmett took the chair across from Theodora. For a few minutes, they made awkward small talk while they ordered food. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, Theodora set down her water glass and looked directly at Emmett. I think we should be honest with each other, Mr. Price. This marriage is a business arrangement, nothing more. My father wants me settled, and you need to keep your ranch. I understand that, and I am willing to go through with it, but I want to know what kind of life I am agreeing to. Emmett appreciated her directness, even if it stung a little. My ranch is small, about 300 acres of grazing land. I have a cabin, 2 rooms, nothing fancy. I run about 40 head of cattle right now, hoping to grow the herd over time. It is a hard life, honest work. I am up before dawn most days, do not get back until after dark. I am not wealthy, Miss Morgan, and I probably never will be, but I pay my debts, I keep my word, and I would never raise a hand to a woman. Theodora listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she nodded slowly. I appreciate your honesty. Let me be equally frank. I was educated at Miss Porter's school in Connecticut. I studied literature, history, mathematics, and French. I can play the piano, paint watercolors, and make polite conversation at dinner parties. None of those skills will be particularly useful on a ranch, I imagine. Can you cook? Emmett asked. A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Adequately. Nothing fancy, but I can keep us from starving. Can you ride? I took lessons as a girl. I am not an expert, but I can stay in a saddle. Then you have more practical skills than you think. Emmett found himself relaxing slightly. She was sharp-tongued, but she was not cruel, and she seemed willing to try. That was more than he had hoped for. "I want to be useful," Theodora said, leaning forward slightly. "I did not spend 4 years at school just to become some man's decoration. If I am going to live on a ranch, I want to contribute to learn how things work. Can you teach me?" Emmett was surprised by the question. Most ladies he had met, the few who had come through Yarrington over the years, seemed to consider ranch work beneath them. "I can teach you. It would be good to have someone who knows how things run in case something happens to me." "In case something happens to you?" Theodora raised an eyebrow. "Accidents happen on ranches. A man can get thrown from a horse, get kicked by a cow, any number of things. I am alone out there, Miss Morgan. If something happened and you did not know how to take care of things, you could lose everything." She considered this, and he saw understanding dawn in her eyes. "You are thinking practically. I appreciate that." Their food arrived, and they ate in more comfortable silence. Jacob, who had been mostly quiet during their exchange, seemed pleased. After dinner, he excused himself, saying he had business to attend to, leaving Emmett and Theodora alone at the table. "Would you like to take a walk?" Emmett asked. "I could show you around town, such as it is." Theodora hesitated, then nodded. "I would like that." They walked out into the warm spring evening. Yarrington was small, just a main street with a few side streets branching off. There was the general store, the saloon, the hotel, a church, a blacksmith, and a handful of other businesses. It took less than 15 minutes to see the whole town. "It is smaller than I expected," Theodora said as they walked past the church, "but I suppose I should not have expected Carson City." "It is a good town," Emmett said, feeling oddly defensive. "Good people for the most part. Everyone helps each other out when times are hard." "I did not mean it as an insult," Theodora said quickly. "Just an observation. I have lived in cities most of my life. This will be quite different." "Do you regret coming?" Emmett asked before he could stop himself. Theodora stopped walking and turned to face him. The setting sun cast golden light across her face, making her hair glow like copper. "I do not know yet. Ask me in a year." "That is fair," Emmett said. They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, and for the first time, Emmett felt a flicker of something beyond resignation. Maybe this could work. Maybe they could build something together, even if it started from nothing. "I should get back," Theodora said finally. "Mrs. Henderson expects me before full dark." Emmett walked her back to the boarding house, and at the door she paused. "Thank you for being honest with me tonight, Mr. Price. I know this situation is as difficult for you as it is for me. Call me Emmett. If we are getting married in 3 days, we should probably use first names." A genuine smile crossed her face, the first one he had seen. "All right, Emmett, and you should call me Theodora." "Theodora," he repeated, liking the way her name sounded. "Good night." "Good night." The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Emmett cleaned his cabin from top to bottom, fixing things that had been broken for months, making space for Theodora's belongings. He bought new curtains for the windows and a rug for the floor, spending money he could not afford because he wanted her to feel like it was a home, not just a place to exist. Theodora spent her time with the local seamstress, altering a dress for the wedding ceremony. She also visited the ranch, inspecting the property with the same critical eye she had used on him that first day. Emmett showed her around, pointing out the boundaries of his land, the creek that provided water, the small garden plot he had been neglecting. "You could grow vegetables here," Theodora said, kneeling by the garden. "Tomatoes, beans, squash. It would supplement your income from cattle." "I am not much of a gardener," Emmett admitted. "Then it is fortunate you are marrying someone who paid attention during botany lessons." She stood, brushing dirt from her hands. I will take care of the garden if you teach me about the cattle. They were finding their balance, learning to negotiate this strange new partnership. Emmett found himself looking forward to their conversations, the way she challenged his assumptions and made him think about things differently. She was intelligent and quick-witted, and despite her refined upbringing, she was not afraid of hard work. The wedding took place on a Thursday afternoon at the small church in Yarrington. It was a simple ceremony, attended by a handful of townspeople and Jacob Morgan. Theodora wore a cream-colored dress with lace at the collar and cuffs, her auburn hair styled elegantly. Emmett wore his best clothes, his hair slicked back, his hands scrubbed clean. Reverend Matthews performed the ceremony, his voice solemn as he spoke about the sacred bonds of marriage, about love and commitment and faith. Emmett repeated his vows, promising to honor and cherish Theodora, and she repeated hers, her voice steady and clear. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Emmett leaned in to kiss her, just a brief, chaste brush of lips, and he felt her tense slightly before relaxing. They were married. The small reception at the hotel was brief. A few people congratulated them, wished them well. Jacob Morgan shook Emmett's hand and kissed his daughter's cheek. "Take care of her," he said quietly to Emmett. "She is stronger than she looks, but she is still my daughter." "I will, sir. You have my word." As the sun began to set, Emmett helped Theodora into the wagon he had borrowed for the occasion. Her trunk and bags were loaded in the back, everything she owned packed into a few pieces of luggage. They rode out to the ranch in silence, the only sound the creak of the wagon wheels and the soft footfalls of the horse. When they arrived, Emmett helped her down and carried her bags inside. The cabin looked small and shabby in the lamplight, despite his efforts to clean it up. He watched Theodora look around, taking in the rough wooden walls, the simple furniture, the lack of any real comfort or luxury. "It is not much," he said, hating how inadequate it all seemed. "It is honest," Theodora said finally. "That is worth something." They stood there awkwardly, neither quite sure what to do next. Finally, Emmett cleared his throat. "You can have the bedroom. I will sleep out here for now, give you some privacy until you are comfortable." Theodora looked at him, surprise clear on her face. "You would do that?" "I am not going to force anything, Theodora. This marriage may have started as a business arrangement, but that does not mean we cannot build something real over time. I am willing to wait until you are ready." He saw something shift in her expression, a softening around her eyes. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I appreciate that." She retreated to the bedroom, and Emmett made himself a bed on the floor by the fireplace, using extra blankets and a pillow that had seen better days. He lay there in the darkness, listening to the sounds of Theodora moving around in the other room, and wondered what the future held for them. The first weeks of marriage were an adjustment for both of them. Emmett rose before dawn as always, quietly so as not to wake Theodora, and headed out to tend the cattle. He would come back to find her up, breakfast made, the cabin tidied. She threw herself into learning the rhythms of ranch life with the same intensity she must have applied to her studies back east. Theodora started working on the garden, clearing weeds and planting seeds. She asked Emmett endless questions about the cattle, about the land, about how to manage the ranch. In the evenings, after the work was done, they would sit outside and talk, watching the sun set over the desert hills. "Tell me about your family," Theodora said one evening about 3 weeks after the wedding. They were sitting on the porch, the air cool and pleasant after the heat of the day. Emmett was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "My father built this place from nothing. He came west after the war, wanted to start fresh somewhere nobody knew him. Met my mother in California, brought her here. They worked this land together for 20 years. She died when I was 12. Fever took her in 3 days. My father never got over it. He kept working, kept building, but something in him died when she did. He passed 2 years ago." "I am sorry," Theodora said softly. "That must have been hard, losing them both." "It was. But they gave me this place, this land. I owe it to them to make something of it." He paused. "What about your family?" "My mother died when I was young too. I barely remember her. My father remarried when I was 10, but his new wife had no interest in raising another woman's child. That is when he sent me east to school. I have spent more time in boarding schools and finishing programs than I have in my father's house." There was no self-pity in her voice, just a statement of fact. "That must have been lonely," Emmett said. "It was, but it made me independent, taught me to rely on myself. In a way, it prepared me for this." She gestured at the ranch spread out before them. They fell into silence, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that came from growing familiarity. Emmett found himself noticing small things about Theodora. The way she hummed while she worked in the garden, the way her face lit up when she successfully managed to rope a fence post on her first try, the way she read at night by lamplight, her brow furrowed in concentration. One morning, about 6 weeks into their marriage, Emmett woke to find Theodora already up and dressed in practical clothes. A simple skirt and blouse, sturdy boots, and a wide-brimmed hat to keep off the sun. "I want to ride with you today," she announced. "Check the cattle, see the whole property. I have been here over a month and I still have not seen everything." Emmett was surprised but pleased. "It will be a long day. We would need to bring supplies, be gone from sunup to sundown." "I can handle it," Theodora said, and there was a challenge in her eyes. They packed food and water and saddled 2 horses. Theodora mounted with only a little awkwardness, and they rode out into the early morning coolness. Emmett showed her the boundaries of his land, pointed out the different grazing areas, explained how he rotated the cattle to keep the grass healthy. He showed her the places where the fence needed repair, the spots where predators sometimes tried to get at the calves. By midday, they stopped by the creek to rest and eat. The water ran clear and cold, fed by snowmelt from the distant mountains. They sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree, eating the lunch Theodora had packed. "It is beautiful out here," Theodora said, looking around at the landscape. "Harsh but beautiful. It grows on you," Emmett agreed. "When I was younger, I used to think about leaving, seeing other places. But this land gets into your blood. I cannot imagine living anywhere else now." Theodora was quiet for a moment, then said, "I am glad I came here. I did not think I would be, but I am." Emmett looked at her, surprised by the admission. "Really? Really?" "Back east, I was supposed to marry some wealthy merchant or lawyer, spend my life hosting parties and doing needlework. It would have been comfortable, but it would have driven me mad. Here, I feel like I am actually living, actually doing something that matters." "You matter," Emmett said before he could stop himself. "To this place, to me." Theodora met his eyes and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection. She reached out and took his hand, and they sat there by the creek, fingers intertwined, just being together. That night, when they returned to the cabin exhausted and sunburned, Theodora did not retreat to the bedroom immediately as she usually did. Instead, she lingered in the main room, and when Emmett started to make up his bed by the fireplace, she stopped him. "You do not have to sleep out here anymore," she said quietly. "We are married. We should share a bed." Emmett's heart hammered in his chest. "Are you sure?" "I am sure." That night marked a turning point in their relationship. They came together hesitantly at first, learning each other's bodies, finding a rhythm that was theirs alone. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Theodora's head on his shoulder, Emmett felt something shift inside him. This was not just an arrangement anymore. This was becoming real. Summer arrived in full force, bringing with it scorching heat and cloudless skies. The work was relentless, mending fences, checking the herd, bringing in hay for the winter months ahead. Theodora worked alongside Emmett, her fair skin tanning despite the hat she wore, her hands developing calluses from handling rope and tools. One afternoon in late July, Emmett was in the barn repairing a saddle when he heard Theodora call his name urgently. He dropped what he was doing and ran outside to find her standing by the corral, pointing toward the south pasture. "Smoke," she said. "There is smoke coming from the direction of the McAllister place." Emmett shaded his eyes and looked where she was pointing. Sure enough, a dark column of smoke rose into the blue sky. The McAllister ranch bordered his property to the south, run by a widow named Sarah McAllister and her teenage son. "Stay here," Emmett said, already moving toward the horses. "Keep an eye on our place." "I am coming with you," Theodora said firmly. "They might need help, and 2 people are better than 1. There was no time to argue. They both saddled horses and rode hard toward the smoke. As they got closer, they could see flames engulfing the McAllister barn. Sarah and her son, Tom, were frantically trying to get the animals out, but the fire was spreading fast. Emmett and Theodora joined in immediately, helping to lead horses and cattle away from the burning structure. The heat was intense, the smoke choking. Emmett went into the barn one last time, making sure no animals were trapped inside, and barely made it out before part of the roof collapsed. By the time the fire burned itself out, the barn was a total loss. Sarah McAllister stood looking at the ruins, tears streaming down her smoke-blackened face. Her son sat on the ground, coughing hard. "We will rebuild," Emmett said, putting a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "The whole community will help." "I cannot afford to rebuild," Sarah said hopelessly. The barn was already mortgaged. "This might be the end for us." Theodora spoke up. "You will stay with us tonight, both of you. We will figure out what to do in the morning when everyone has had a chance to rest and think clearly." Sarah looked at her gratefully. "Thank you, Mrs. Price. You are very kind." That night, crowded into the small cabin with their unexpected guests, Emmett and Theodora worked together seamlessly, providing food and comfort. The next morning, Emmett rode into town and organized a work party. Within 2 days, half the ranchers in the area had shown up with lumber and tools to help rebuild the McAllister barn. Theodora organized the women to provide food and water for the workers. She moved through the crowd with confidence, directing efforts, solving problems. Emmett watched her and felt a surge of pride. This was his wife, strong and capable, earning respect through her actions. When the barn was finished a week later, Sarah McAllister hugged both Emmett and Theodora. "I will never forget what you did for us," she said. "If you ever need anything at all, you just ask." Riding home that evening, Theodora was quiet. Finally, she said, "That is what I love about this place. People take care of each other. Back east, everyone was so concerned with status and appearances. Here, what matters is whether you can be counted on when things get hard." "You can be counted on," Emmett said. "Everyone saw that this week." She smiled at him, and in the golden light of sunset she was so beautiful it made his chest ache. Somewhere along the way, without him quite realizing when it happened, he had fallen in love with his wife. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He loved her. He loved her quick mind and her stubborn determination. He loved the way she threw herself into challenges, the way she never backed down from hard work. He loved the way she looked in the morning with her hair loose around her shoulders, and the way she laughed at his terrible jokes, and the way she fit perfectly against him when they lay in bed at night. He loved her, and he had no idea how to tell her. Fall came, bringing cooler temperatures and the hard work of preparing for winter. Emmett and Theodora worked together to stockpile hay, to check and double-check that the cattle were healthy, to make sure the cabin was ready for the cold months ahead. Their partnership had grown into something solid, something he depended on more than he had ever expected. One evening in October, they were sitting by the fire after dinner. Theodora was mending one of his shirts, her needle flashing in the firelight. Emmett watched her, trying to find the words for what he wanted to say. "Theodora," he finally began, his voice rough, "there is something I need to tell you." She looked up from her sewing, her expression curious. "What is it? When we got married, it was because I owed your father a debt. It was a business arrangement, nothing more. But somewhere along the way, things changed for me." He paused, gathering his courage. "I have fallen in love with you. I love you more than I thought I could love anyone, and I needed you to know that, even if you do not feel the same way." Theodora set down her sewing, her eyes wide. For a long moment she said nothing, and Emmett felt his heart sink. He had misread things, pushed too fast, ruined what they had built. Then she stood and crossed to where he sat, kneeling in front of him and taking his hands in hers. "You foolish man," she said, but her voice was gentle, almost laughing. "I have been in love with you for months. I was just waiting for you to realize it." Relief and joy flooded through him. "You love me." "I love you," she confirmed. "I love your honesty and your integrity. I love how hard you work and how much you care about this land. I love that you gave me space when I needed it, and that you have never treated me as less than your equal. I love you, Emmett Price, with everything I am." He pulled her up and kissed her deeply, pouring everything he felt into it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I was so afraid I had married you under false pretenses," he admitted, "that you would always resent me for it." "I resented my father maybe at first," Theodora said, "but never you. You have only ever been honest with me, even when the truth was not flattering to you. That is what made me start to care about you and eventually fall in love with you." They sat together by the fire, wrapped in each other's arms, and Emmett felt a contentment he had never known before. This woman, this incredible woman, loved him. They had built something real from the ashes of a gambling debt, something strong and lasting. Winter came hard that year. Snow piled high around the cabin, and for weeks at a time they were cut off from town. But Emmett did not mind. He had everything he needed right here, his land, his cattle, and his wife. They spent the long winter evenings talking and reading, making love in the warmth of their bed while wind howled outside, planning for the spring and the future they would build together. Theodora taught him about the books she had read, introduced him to ideas and philosophies he had never encountered. Emmett taught her about the land, about reading weather patterns and understanding animal behavior. They learned from each other, grew together. One snowy evening in January, Theodora looked up from the book she was reading and said, "I never thanked you." "For what?" Emmett asked, looking up from the piece of leather he was working on. "For taking a chance on me. For agreeing to marry a complete stranger. It could have been a disaster, but instead, it has been the best thing that ever happened to me." "You are the best thing that ever happened to me," Emmett said seriously. "I thought losing that poker game was the worst moment of my life. Turns out it was the best." Theodora laughed. "Only you would see it that way. It is true. If I had not been a foolish kid who thought he could win big, I never would have met you. Sometimes good things come from bad decisions." "So you are saying I should be grateful to your poor gambling skills?" "Exactly." He grinned at her. She threw a pillow at him and he caught it, laughing. These were the moments he treasured. The easy banter, the comfortable domesticity, the knowledge that this was his life now with this woman. Spring returned with renewed vigor, and with it came new challenges. Several of their cattle had calves, increasing their herd. The garden Theodora had planted the previous year was thriving, providing them with fresh vegetables. Money was still tight, but they were making it work through careful planning and hard effort. In April, Theodora began feeling ill in the mornings. At first, she dismissed it as something she ate, but when it continued for more than a week, Emmett insisted they ride into town to see the doctor. Dr. Wilson was a kind older man who had been practicing medicine in Yarrington for 20 years. He examined Theodora while Emmett waited anxiously in the outer room. When they finally emerged, Theodora was smiling, and the doctor was grinning broadly. "Congratulations, Mr. Price," Dr. Wilson said, shaking his hand. "You are going to be a father." Emmett stared at him blankly for a moment, then turned to Theodora. "You are pregnant," she nodded, her eyes shining with tears. "We are going to have a baby." He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. A baby. They were going to have a baby. The joy was almost overwhelming. The pregnancy brought new worries and new excitements. Emmett became fiercely protective, trying to take over all the heavy work so Theodora would not strain herself. She tolerated his concern for about a week before putting her foot down. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him firmly. "I can still work, still contribute." "You are not doing this alone." They compromised, with Theodora handling lighter tasks but still staying involved in running the ranch. As her belly grew over the summer months, Emmett found himself constantly amazed. There was a whole person growing inside her, a child they had created together. It made everything feel more real, more permanent. He started working on expanding the cabin, adding a small room that would serve as a nursery. Neighbors helped, contributing time and materials, excited about the new baby coming into their small community. Sarah McAllister brought over a cradle that her son had used as an infant, beautifully carved and still sturdy. Theodora sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands moving expertly. Sometimes Emmett would catch her with a hand on her belly, a soft smile on her face, and he would feel such love for her that it was almost painful. In late September, as the leaves were turning gold and red in the cottonwoods, Theodora went into labor. It was a long, difficult birth that lasted through the night. Emmett stayed by her side the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, feeling helpless in the face of her pain. Dr. Wilson worked calmly, and Sarah McAllister helped, having gone through childbirth herself. Just as dawn was breaking, their son was born. He came into the world with a lusty cry, his tiny fists waving. Dr. Wilson cleaned him and wrapped him in a blanket, then placed him in Theodora's arms. "He is perfect," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Emmett looked at his son, this tiny person with a shock of dark hair and his mother's nose, and felt his world shift completely. He had thought he understood love when he fell for Theodora, but this was something different, something primal and fierce. "What should we name him?" Theodora asked, looking up at Emmett. They had discussed names for months, unable to decide. But looking at his son now, the name came to him clearly. "James Edward Price, after my father," Theodora smiled. "James Edward Price, it is perfect." The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful. James was a healthy baby with powerful lungs, keeping them up at all hours. Emmett learned to change diapers and warm bottles, to walk the floor at 3 in the morning when James would not settle. Theodora handled it all with the same determination she brought to everything, even when she was running on 2 hours of sleep. Jacob Morgan came to visit when James was 2 months old, making the trip from Carson City to meet his grandson. He held the baby with surprising gentleness, a soft expression on his usually hard face. "He looks like you did as a baby, Theodora," Jacob said. "Same eyes, same stubborn set to his jaw. I hope he has his father's temperament," Theodora said, smiling at Emmett. "More patience than I will ever have." Jacob stayed for 3 days, and during that time, Emmett saw a different side of him. He helped with chores around the ranch, told stories about Theodora's childhood, and genuinely seemed to enjoy being a grandfather. On the morning he was preparing to leave, he pulled Emmett aside. "I want to apologize," Jacob said gruffly, "for forcing you into that marriage. It was not right, using your debt to manipulate the situation." Emmett was surprised by the apology. "I appreciate that, sir. But it worked out better than either of us could have expected." "It did. You have been good for her, made her happier than I have ever seen her, and she has been good for you too, I think." Jacob extended his hand. "You are a good man, Emmett Price. I am glad my daughter married you." They shook hands, and Emmett felt like he had finally earned Jacob's respect, not as a debtor but as a son-in-law and father to his grandson. The years that followed were full and rich. James grew from a baby into a toddler, then a young boy who followed his father everywhere, wanting to help with every ranch task. 2 years after James was born, Theodora gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after their neighbor who had become such a good friend. 3 years after that, another son came whom they named Robert. The ranch grew too. With careful management and hard work, Emmett increased their herd to over 100 head. He bought an adjacent property when the owner moved back east, doubling their grazing land. They built a larger house, with separate bedrooms for the children and even a small parlor where Theodora could read and the family could gather. Money was never abundant, but it was enough. More importantly, they had built a life together, a real partnership based on love and mutual respect. Emmett would sometimes think back to that night in the saloon, watching the candle burn down as he made his decision, and marvel at how different his life had turned out from what he expected. He had married Theodora to settle a debt, had fallen in love with her before realizing it was happening. Now, 17 years after that fateful poker game, he could not imagine his life any other way. One evening in early summer, Emmett and Theodora sat on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over their land. The children were inside, James helping Sarah and Robert with their reading lessons. At 19, James was nearly a man himself, tall and strong with his mother's eyes and his father's quiet determination. "You ever regret it?" Emmett asked Theodora. "Marrying me, coming to live this life?" Theodora looked at him, surprised. "Where is this coming from?" "I was just thinking about how different your life could have been. You could have married someone wealthy, lived in a fine house in a city, had servants and nice things." "And been miserable," Theodora finished. "Emmett, I have never regretted this life, not for a single moment. Yes, it has been hard sometimes. Yes, there have been years when money was tight and we were not sure we would make it. But I would take this life, with you and our children and this land, over any amount of wealth or comfort." She took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "You gave me something I never expected to have, a real partnership, a true marriage. We built this together from nothing. That means more to me than anything else ever could." Emmett brought her hand to his lips and kissed it. "I love you. I have loved you since that summer we spent rebuilding the McAllister barn, maybe even before. I think I started falling in love with you that very first night at dinner when you told me you wanted to be useful." "I love you too," Theodora said. "My stubborn, honorable cowboy who married me to settle a debt and gave me the world instead." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. From inside the house, they could hear their children's voices, James patiently explaining something to Robert, Sarah laughing at something one of her brothers said. This was what mattered. Not wealth or status or any of the things that had seemed important when they were younger. This, family, land, love. They had built it together from a foundation of necessity and hope, and it had grown into something strong and beautiful. James came out onto the porch, his expression serious. "Pa, one of the fence posts in the north pasture is broken. I can ride out at first light and fix it. We will go together," Emmett said. "Good to teach you the right way to set a post." "You have taught me about 100 times already," James said, but he was smiling. "Then this will be 101. Emmett smiled back. "You cannot learn this kind of thing too many times. Someday this will all be yours to manage." James's expression grew thoughtful. "It is a lot of responsibility." "It is. But you do not have to carry it alone. Your mother and I are partners in this ranch, and someday you will find a partner too, someone to share the burden and the joy." "Someone like Ma?" James asked. Theodora laughed. "I hope you find someone exactly like me, but perhaps a bit less stubborn." "That would be asking for a miracle," Emmett teased, and Theodora swatted his arm playfully. James watched his parents, saw the love and respect between them, and smiled. "I will do my best," he promised. After James went back inside, Emmett pulled Theodora closer. "He is a good boy, they all are." "We have been blessed," Theodora agreed. "I know not every arranged marriage works out as well as ours did." "It worked out because we both put in the effort," Emmett said. "Because we chose to make it work, even when it would have been easier to give up." "We are both too stubborn to give up," Theodora pointed out. "That too." Emmett kissed her temple. "I am grateful for it, though, for all of it. For that poker game that I lost, for your father's proposition, for the chance to know you and love you." The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the rhythms of ranch life. James eventually did find a partner, a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, and they married when he was 22. They built a house on the far edge of the Price property, close enough to help but far enough for independence. Sarah, who had inherited her mother's intelligence and determination, became a teacher in Yerington, living in town during the week and coming home on weekends. Robert, the youngest, surprised everyone by developing a talent for working with horses, training them with patience and skill. Emmett and Theodora grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces lined by sun and wind and laughter. They remained partners in every sense, working together to keep the ranch running even as they passed more responsibilities to the next generation. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Emmett arranged a special dinner at the hotel in Yerington, just the two of them. Their children watched the ranch for the evening, giving them a rare night of privacy and leisure. Sitting across from Theodora in the same restaurant where they had had that first awkward dinner all those years ago, Emmett raised his glass. "To 25 years of marriage and to many more to come." Theodora clinked her glass against his. "25 years since you married me to settle a debt. I think you got the better end of that bargain." "I absolutely did," Emmett agreed. "Your father probably knew exactly what he was doing when he made that proposition." "You think so?" "I do. He is a shrewd man. He saw that we were both stubborn and practical, that we both valued hard work and honesty. He bet that we could build something together, and he was right." Theodora considered this. "I never thought of it that way. I always assumed he just wanted me off his hands, settled with someone respectable." "Maybe that too. But he gave us a gift, even if we did not realize it at the time. He gave us the chance to build a real marriage, a real partnership." After dinner, they walked through Yerington, now larger and more prosperous than it had been when Theodora first arrived. Electric lights had recently been installed on the main street, a sign of progress and changing times. "It is strange," Theodora said as they walked. "I remember getting off that stage, seeing you for the first time, being so angry at my father for forcing me into this marriage. I was terrified and furious, and determined not to let either of you see it. I remember thinking you were the most beautiful, intimidating woman I had ever seen, Emmett said. I was sure you would hate me forever, that we would live in cold silence for the rest of our lives. Instead, we fell in love. Theodora smiled up at him. When did you know? When did you know you loved me? Emmett thought back, trying to pinpoint the exact moment. I think it was that week we helped rebuild the McAllister barn, watching you work alongside everyone, solving problems, taking charge. I saw you not as Jacob Morgan's daughter or the woman I had to marry, but as yourself, strong and capable and incredible. That was when I started to fall. For me, it was earlier, Theodora admitted. It was that first time you took me out to see the whole ranch and we stopped by the creek. You were so patient, explaining everything, treating me like an equal partner even though I knew nothing about ranching. That was when I started to see you as more than just the man I had been forced to marry. They reached the edge of town and stood looking out at the desert, silver under the moonlight. This land that had brought them together, this harsh, beautiful place that they had made their home. We should get back, Theodora said eventually. I do not trust the children not to throw a party while we are gone, Emmett laughed. They are all adults now, mostly. I think we can trust them for one evening. But they headed back anyway, driving the wagon home under the stars. The ranch house was lit up when they arrived, and they could see their children through the windows. James and his wife, Sarah home for the weekend, Robert with his latest horse project. Their grandchildren, James's 3 children, were running around causing cheerful chaos. This is our legacy, Emmett said softly. Not just the land, but this. Family, love, the life we built together. It is a good legacy, Theodora agreed. They went inside to join their family, and Emmett felt that familiar surge of contentment. He had started with nothing but a gambling debt and a desperate hope. He had married a stranger to keep his ranch, expecting nothing but a business arrangement. Instead, he had found love. Real, deep, lasting love. He had found a partner who made him better, who challenged him and supported him, and built a life with him that was richer than any amount of money could buy. The years continued to unfold, each one bringing new joys and new challenges. There were hard times, droughts that tested their resources, illnesses that scared them, losses that brought grief. But through it all, Emmett and Theodora faced everything together, their bond growing stronger with each passing year. Emmett taught all his grandchildren to ride, just as he had taught his own children. He showed them the boundaries of the ranch, told them stories about their grandmother arriving on the stage from Carson City, about building a life from nothing. He wanted them to understand that love and hard work could overcome any obstacle, that family was the most important thing in the world. Theodora, for her part, taught the grandchildren to read and to think critically, to ask questions and seek answers. She told them stories about growing up back east, about learning to rope cattle and plant gardens, about choosing to build a life in the harsh Nevada desert because it was where her heart led her. On quiet evenings, when it was just the two of them again after the grandchildren had gone home, Emmett and Theodora would sit on their porch and watch the sun set, just as they had done for decades. They did not need to talk much anymore. They knew each other so well that words were often unnecessary. But sometimes, Theodora would lean her head on Emmett's shoulder and say, "I love you," and Emmett would kiss her hair and reply, "I love you too, always," because that was the truth of it. From a marriage born of debt and necessity, they had created something beautiful and lasting. They had loved each other before they even realized it, their feelings growing steadily like plants in Theodora's garden, nourished by respect and partnership and shared dreams. The candle that Jacob Morgan had lit that night in the saloon had long since burned down, but the love between Emmett and Theodora would burn forever, passed down through their children and grandchildren, a legacy more valuable than any amount of land or cattle. They were partners, lovers, best friends. They had built an empire from dust and determination, but more importantly, they had built a marriage that stood as proof that love could grow anywhere, even in the most unlikely circumstances. As they grew older still, into their 60s and beyond, they finally stepped back from the daily running of the ranch, letting James take over as the primary manager. They kept their house, kept their routines, but the burden of constant work finally lifted from their shoulders. Emmett and Theodora spent their days walking the land they had built together, visiting with grandchildren and now great-grandchildren, reading books, and simply enjoying each other's company. They had earned their rest, and they took it gratefully. One evening in late spring, when Emmett was 73 and Theodora was 69, they sat on their porch watching another spectacular sunset. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink and purple, the kind of sunset that reminded them why they loved this place. "Do you remember that first sunset we watched together?" Theodora asked. "After we met when you showed me around town." "I remember," Emmett said. "I was terrified you would hate me, hate this life." "I was terrified too," Theodora admitted. "Terrified I had made a terrible mistake, that I would be miserable forever." "Were you miserable?" she laughed, the sound still as bright as it had been when she was young. "Not for a single day." "Well, maybe a few days when the children were small and I had not slept in a week, but those do not count." "Fair enough." Emmett squeezed her hand gently. "I am glad you came here, Theodora. Glad you took a chance on this life on me." "Best decision I ever made," she said firmly. "Even if I did not really have a choice at the time." "You always had a choice," Emmett said. "You could have run away, refused to go through with it, any number of things. But you stayed and you worked and you built this life with me. That was your choice." Theodora was quiet for a moment, thinking. "You are right. I did choose this every day. I chose to stay, to try to love you, and you chose the same." "Every single day," Emmett confirmed. "It has been the easiest choice I have ever made." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, and the stars began to emerge. Inside the house, they could hear their great-grandchildren playing, could hear James talking to Robert about some ranch business. Life continued, generation after generation, all of it built on the foundation that Emmett and Theodora had laid so many years ago. That night, lying in bed with Theodora curled against him as she had been for nearly 5 decades, Emmett thought about his father and mother, about the love they had shared. He had wanted that for himself, had always hoped to find what they had. In the end, he had found something even more precious, a love that had been forged in adversity, tested by hardship, and proven stronger than anything life could throw at it. "Thank you," he whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Theodora murmured, already half asleep. "For everything. For loving me, for building this life with me, for being the best partner a man could ask for." "You are welcome," she said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "Thank you for the same." They fell asleep holding each other, as they had done for so many years. Two souls perfectly matched despite the unlikely circumstances that had brought them together. The ranch continued to thrive under James's management, growing larger and more prosperous with each passing year. Sarah's teaching career flourished, and she eventually became the principal of the school in Yarrington. Robert's horse training business expanded, with people coming from as far as California to buy his expertly trained animals. Emmett and Theodora lived to see all their children settled and happy, to see their grandchildren grown with families of their own, to see their great-grandchildren take their first steps and speak their first words. They had created not just a ranch but a dynasty, a family legacy that would continue for generations. When Emmett was 78, he became ill with pneumonia. Dr. Wilson, now ancient himself and practicing alongside his son, came out to the ranch and did what he could, but they all knew the truth. Emmett was old, tired, and ready to rest. Theodora sat by his bedside for 3 days, holding his hand, talking to him about their life together. Their children came, their grandchildren, saying their goodbyes. But when the end came, it was just the two of them, alone in the bedroom they had shared for so many years. "I love you," Emmett whispered, his voice barely audible. "I've loved you from the moment I truly saw you, and I will love you beyond this life." "I love you too," Theodora said, tears streaming down her face. "You gave me everything, Emmett Price. A home, a family, a love I never dreamed possible. Thank you." "Thank you," he echoed. "For taking a chance on a foolish cowboy. For making my life something beautiful." Those were his last words. He closed his eyes, squeezed her hand one final time, and slipped away peacefully. Theodora mourned deeply, as did their entire family. Emmett was buried on a hill overlooking the ranch, his grave marked with a simple stone that read, "Emmett Price, 1856–1934, beloved husband, father, and friend." Theodora lived for another 6 years, remaining active and involved with her family. She never remarried, never even considered it. Emmett had been her one true love, and she was content to live out her remaining years with his memory and the legacy they had built together. She spent her time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather, about the life they had built from nothing. She wanted them to understand that love was not always easy or simple, but it was always worth fighting for. When Theodora died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 81, she was buried next to Emmett on that hill overlooking the ranch. Her stone matched his, rating, "Theodora Price, 1860–1941, beloved wife, mother, and friend." Their children made sure that the graves were always well tended, that flowers bloomed there in the spring and summer. It became a tradition for each new generation to visit the graves, to hear the story of how Emmett and Theodora had met and fallen in love, how they had built the ranch and the family from determination and hope and deep, abiding love. The ranch itself continued to grow and prosper, passing down through the generations. Each new generation added something, expanded or improved or innovated, but they all maintained the core values that Emmett and Theodora had instilled: hard work, integrity, family, and love. James's great-great-grandchildren would eventually work the ranch, over a century after that poker game in the Silver Spur Saloon. They would walk the same land, work the same pastures, and know that everything they had came from a gambling debt and a candle burning down, from two people who had married as strangers and died as soulmates. The story became part of the family lore, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires. How Emmett Price, young and desperate, had lost everything in a poker game. How Jacob Morgan had offered him a way out, a marriage to his daughter in exchange for keeping his ranch. How Emmett had watched a candle burn down while making the most important decision of his life, and how that decision, made in desperation and hope, had led to one of the greatest love stories the territory had ever known. Because Emmett had married Theodora to settle a debt, but he had fallen in love with her long before that symbolic candle had burned down. He had loved her before he even realized it, his heart recognizing what his mind took longer to accept. In the end, that was the true magic of their story, not that they had been forced together by circumstance, but that they had chosen every single day to build something real and lasting. They had chosen love over resentment, partnership over stubbornness, hope over despair. Their love had started as a business transaction, but it had grown into something transcendent, something that outlasted their lives and became the foundation for generations of happiness. It proved that love could bloom anywhere, even in the harsh desert of Nevada, even between two strangers bound by debt and duty. The Price Ranch stood as a testament to what they had built, but the real legacy was in the hearts of their descendants, in the love and respect and partnership that each generation learned from the story of Emmett and Theodora. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the ranch in brilliant shades of orange and gold, those who knew the story would sometimes swear they could feel the presence of two souls, still watching over the land they had loved, still together as they had been in life. Because true love never dies. It lives on in the stories we tell, in the lives we touch, in the legacy we leave behind. And the love between Emmett and Theodora Price was as true as any love could be, forged in fire and tested by time, a love that had conquered every obstacle and emerged stronger than ever. That was how a debt became a blessing, how strangers became soulmates, how a single candle burning down in a saloon changed the course of countless lives. It was a love story for the ages, set against the backdrop of the wild Nevada desert, where two people found each other against all odds and built something beautiful that would last forever.